Hello everyone, I hope you guys are having a fantastic day and welcome to another Vlogmas video. Today's video is another non-Christmassy video, but it is a video I'm very excited to film, and that is because it is a discussion video for Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. As you guys may know, I've been doing a series on my channel called Realm of the Elderlings Revisited, and it's basically where I go through as I reread each Robin Hobb book and I film a discussion video on that book. So all of my thoughts and feelings and everything that I want to share about that book, I share in this. So it's kind of like a book review, but it's more just kind of my thoughts and feelings on the book itself. I do have a spoiler section on these videos, but it's at the end of the video and I will forewarn you before I get to it, so don't worry about being spoiled. That's a section where I usually discuss things that are foreshadowed in, for example, this book for events that happen in later books, or just different events that tie in to future books from this book, that kind of a thing. So don't worry, you will not be spoiled. I will warn you before I get to those parts. So without further ado, let us start on the discussion for Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. So I'm not going to hold the book because it is like a 900-page book and it's heavy, but I think you guys all know at this point what book I'm talking about. So Ship of Magic is the first book in the Liveship Traders Trilogy. This is a trilogy that takes place directly after the Farseer Trilogy. Once upon a time, I actually emailed Robin Hobb to ask her kind of the timeline for her books, and she told me that Ship of Magic Liveship Traders Trilogy takes place roughly 7 years after the end of the Farseer Trilogy. So for context on what time period this is encompassing, that is it. I always recommend to read Robin Hobb's books in reading order. I will actually have that reading order listed down below because all of her books build off one another. So yes, the Farseer Trilogy, which is the first trilogy, and the Liveship Traders Trilogy, you can kind of read, you know, interchangeably. You can start with one or start with the other. I personally feel that you should start with Farseer because there's a specific character and things that happen in live ships that won't be as poignant and be as exciting if you have not read the Farseer Trilogy. So I'll get into that more in my spoiler section. But as I said, Ship of Magic takes place about 7 years after the end of the Farseer Trilogy in a completely separate part of this world. So this series takes place in what's known as the Rain Wilds, so it's kind of a more tropical type merchant class people. So it takes place primarily in Bingtown, which is a settlement of people that basically split off from the parent country of Jamila. I'm not really sure how you say it. That's how I pronounce it. And they basically settled this land known as the Rain Wilds. And this land is known for a lot of really mysterious and magical objects that they're plundering from the cities of the Elderlings. If you're familiar with the Elderlings, if you ever read the Farseer Trilogy, those are like these ancient people that had the ability to use magics, and like dragons existed back then, that kind of a thing. So the people of Bingtown basically are able to sell and market these rare artifacts that they find in the Elderling settlements and sell them for a profit. So the Bingtown, so this world is very much more civilized and classy than the Six Duchies, which is where the Farseer Trilogy takes place. And throughout the book, there's actually references to the barbarians in the Six Duchies, so they very much feel that the Six Duchies, which is where Fitz is from, are kind of like barbarian, northern, cold, tribe type people. Like they're very much different. I would kind of describe the Bingtown and Jamilan culture as a little bit French, I guess I would say. Kind of like, you know, Renaissance, Victorian era French is kind of how I view this society for context, whereas I would view kind of the Six Duchies society as more medieval based. So this series is different from the Farseer Trilogy in that it does not follow one character through first-person perspective. It follows multiple characters through a third-person perspective. The first character perspective that we are introduced to in this series is actually those of sea serpents. Sea serpents end up playing kind of an important role not only in this book, but this series and future books as well. So we're first introduced to their character perspective, which is very interesting and intriguing and not something you would expect to find, but yet here we are. Then we're introduced to the pirate Captain Kennet. Kennet is a very reprehensible type character, but a character that plays a very pivotal role in this series. He is a pirate that is hell-bent upon creating like a kingdom of pirates. He wants to be king of the pirates, and the story starts out with him going to the Others Island, which is this mysterious island that houses these creatures that are able to like tell your future, basically. We're then introduced to the character perspective of Althea Vestrit. Althea is the daughter of a Bingtown trader family and the daughter of a family that owns live ships. Live ships are these ships that are alive, basically, as you know, you can tell from the name. So the figurehead can talk and speak and interact with everybody else. It's like its own being. But a live ship doesn't quicken until 3 captains have died upon the ship itself. So the Vestrit family life ship has not yet quickened at the start of the story. Althea is on the ship with her brother-in-law, Kyle. Kyle has taken over the ship because Althea's father is homesick. And Kyle is one of the most reprehensible characters in any of Robin Hobb's books. I hate him so much. So you're kind of given a taste of how awful Kyle Haven is in this book. And then we are introduced to the character perspective of Brashen, who at this time is also serving on the same Vestrit family ship as Althea. We are then given the character perspective of Althea's mother, Ronica, her sister, Kefria, and her young niece, Malta. And Malta is another character that you will just hate in this book. She's a little brat. The other thing that I want to talk about is about Paragon. That's the other character perspective we're introduced to. He is this cursed life ship, one that has allegedly killed a couple of crews, and he was stolen by a pirate and used by the pirate Egrat. And there's a very interesting connection between him and the other characters, and he's one of my favorite characters in this series. So as I said, there's a lot of different character perspectives that this book follows, and basically it kind of starts to show how all of their paths start to cross. Kyle Haven ends up taking over the family life ship. Althea was expecting to be captain of the ship, but her father, upon his death, ends up willing it to her sister. So she goes off to kind of find her own fortune. So does Brashen. And then you have Malta, Kefri, and Ronica kind of struggling at home because the family fortunes are at risk. And there's just a lot going on. Plus there's like the politics of Bingtown kind of competing against the taxes and tariffs in Jamila City. So there's like a lot of political, cultural intrigue going on in the society. And the other thing that Robin Hobb really explores in this book is a lot of societal issues that we find in our own world, and particularly that of slavery. Slavery is very, very big in this world. The Chalcedons, which actually border between Bingtown and the Six Duchies, they use slaves. And some people in Bingtown are starting to use slaves as well, even though it's technically illegal. So you start to get a hint of this issue in this book. It's something that she really starts to explore throughout this trilogy. So we have little hints of that as well, especially since Kyle Haven, when he takes over the family life ship, decides to use it as a slaver, which is unheard of because it really affects live ships when they have so much human anguish occurring on their decks. So there's like a lot going on to this series. There's a lot of things that she tackles, and it's actually probably, of all of the trilogies, my favorite whole trilogy by Robin Hobb. So that's kind of an overview of the story. Now I'm going to kind of get into some of my feelings. I was really proactive this time, and I tabbed the heck out of this book so I can kind of tackle the things that I want to discuss. The first thing I want to discuss in this book is the role of men in this world. The society of Bingtown and Jamila is very different from the Six Duchies. When you read the Farseer trilogy, women and men kind of had an equal partnership and role in that society. Women did and were expected to do a lot of the same jobs as the men. So they served as soldiers and guards and things of that nature. It's not so in this society. It's very patriarchal, and the men are very domineering of the woman. Bingtown didn't used to be this way, but as Jamila and Chalcedon customs have kind of come to influence the culture of Bingtown. And you really start to see this cultural shift with Kyle himself. He believes that women should just stay home, get married, and raise the kids. And he's just a complete chauvinistic asshole. I hate him so much. And so you really start to see him try to control Ronica, which is his mother-in-law, and his wife Kefria. And not only that, but just the domineering nature over his children. He forces his son Wintro, who has returned to witness his grandfather's death. He has returned from the priesthood, where they had offered him up to become a priest of Sa. And he's basically abusing his son because he's forcing him onto the life ship, because the life ship always needs a blood-related family member on their decks to stay sane. And he like completely just punches him in the face and knocks him down, and like Kefria doesn't do anything. So this is like kind of the start of me being frustrated with Kefria's character, because she's very much just kind of in the first couple of books allowing her husband to get away with things because she doesn't want to deal with the confrontation, and she's very much falling into that role of like the submissive woman. Ronica not so much. She starts to see that maybe she made a mistake in allowing her husband to will and talk her husband into willing the ship to Kefria and her husband Kyle. I think this is really when she realized that she kind of screwed up and should have let the ship go to Althea. And this is really where you get a taste of just how awful Kyle Haven is. Like, I hate him so much, guys. I hate him. There's a point in this book, however, where Kefria realizes Kyle is not that great, and Althea and her mom Ronica maybe are right about him. And it is this right here. He comes home and he's allowing Malta, their daughter, to basically get away with murder, because Malta at the age of 13 feels she should be a woman, and Kefria is like, no, she's not a woman, this shouldn't be happening. And it's this scene right here in the book where she realizes that maybe Kyle Haven is an asshole. And she says the truth was that he had never been the romantic figure her fancies had made him. He was just a man like any other man. No, he was stupider than most. And this is like halfway through the book, and I'm like, like, not even halfway, it's like a little over halfway. And I'm like, really, Kefria? It took you this long? You've been married to the man for 15 years and you're just now realizing he's a stupid asshole? But she was getting there, which made me very happy. Which kind of leads me to the other discussion point I want to talk about in this book, and that is the character of Malta. I had really mixed feelings with Malta, especially on a reread. So Malta, at the age of 13, she's almost 14, she feels that she's a woman, she feels that she should be presented to society as a woman, and she's just sitting there basically flirting with every single male that, you know, just comes into her life, and she's using them because she likes, you know, she's starting to show kind of devious behavior. She lies to her mom and she uses men only for the attention that they give her and for the gifts that they give her. She then kind of stalks off and buys herself this gown that is deemed to be a little bit on the scandalous side. It's something that people of ill repute wear in Jemima Island City, but Malta, being young, just thought it was something that was fashionable. And she ends up going to this ball alone and kind of causing a little bit of a scandal. In addition to that, Malta ends up kind of allowing herself to be courted by a young Rain Wilds man. So there are people who live in the Rain Wilds, and the nature of the magic that resides in this land has caused them to take on a certain appearance. So a lot of them start to develop growths and things like that. So they wear like veils to cover their faces because they often have like, you know, weird growths on their faces and they don't want people to see it. So she ends up unknowingly at one of these like get-togethers for the traders, allowing him to pursue her as a potential love interest. And this family is the most important family in the Rain Wilds. They end up buying the debt on the live ship Vivacia, which is the Vestrit family live ship. And 6 generations to pay off this debt. And what Malta doesn't know is that if they can't pay off the debt, then the family that owes this debt is required to give up a son or daughter to the family that owns the debt on the live ship, basically marry into the family, and then the debt is absolved through that way. So Malta ends up accepting his suit. That family, the Kupris family, ends up buying the debt on the live ship, and now Malta's stuck in a bit of a pickle because she has to be courted by this Rain Wild man. The thing I found a little bit creepy is that Malta's 14 and he's 21, and I don't know, it feels icky. I recognize that this is like a society that is very reminiscent of like the Renaissance time period, so it wasn't unusual even back then and even now for people to get married at the age of 14, but it still felt creepy. And for some reason I felt creepier about it when I was rereading this story than I did when I first read it. But Malta is such a little brat. She doesn't understand the actions that she is taking, how much they like influence the family fortunes and the family future, and she's just so spoiled and she just uses everybody around her. She's cruel to everybody around her, especially her mother and her grandmother, and she like embodies everything terrible of her father, Kyle, who she thinks is like the best thing since sliced bread. So Malta is a very, very frustrating character, but she's also a character that has one of the most intriguing character arcs out of all of Robin Hobb's books. The other thing that I want to talk about in this book is all of the 6 Duchies references. So I tabbed all of those references because I don't know why they made me excited, but they did. So at one point when Ronica is at the beginning of the book, her first time we are introduced to her character, and she's kind of thinking about how they're losing all their money and their fortune, and she says, but there was cheap slave-grown grain and fruit from Charleston to compete with, and the damned red-shipped wars to the north destroying trade there. And I'm like, it was so much more than that. You don't understand. Like, to them, it's just something that messed up their trade and affected their fortunes, but after having read the Farseer trilogy, we're so much more aware of everything that the red ships wars caused, and it's like, I don't know, I like it when authors tie in things from other books. It makes me really excited, particularly when it's characters that know nothing about each other. At another point in the book, a sailor is telling Althea about dragons seen over the 6 Duchies, and he said, no, don't be telling me that, nor any sailor was off the 6 Duchies coast a few years back. I saw dragons, and not just 1 or 2, a whole phalanx of them, flying like geese in every bright color and shape you can name, and not just once, but twice. There's some that say they brought the serpents, but that ain't true. I've seen serpents before that, way down south. Of course, nowadays we see a lot more of them, so folk believe in them. But when you've sailed as long as I have, and been as far as you learn that there's a lot of things that are real, but only a few folk have seen them. And I'm like, that's right. And Althea doesn't believe him. And I'm like, oh, Althea, if only you knew. I mean, we now know they weren't true dragons, they were the stone dragons, but still, I love references and tie-ins like that. At another point, Brashen is trying to tell Althea if she wants to go on a ship, she should just like go up north because they allow women on their ships. And Althea goes, barbarian women. They're more related to the Out Islanders than they are to us. And from what I've heard, they spend most of their time trying to kill each other off. Brashen, most of them can't even read. They get married in front of rocks. Saw help us all. And it's like, oh my god, it's so funny to hear characters talking about customs and natures of like other books. I love it so much. Plus, like we know in Front of Rocks, it has to do with the witness stones, and they spend most of their time trying to kill each other, which is sadly fairly true. The other thing that I found interesting in this book was that there's quite a few references to what we know as the skill from the Farseer trilogy, but this world doesn't really have any concept of the skill, so it's really interesting to see these hints of it, but they don't quite know what it is. And of course we're very familiar with it from the Farseer trilogy. But the first introduction we have to this reference is with Wintrow, when he is, you know, at the monastery being trained to be a priest, and he's working on this stained glass window that he is making. And apparently Wintrow gets into this meditative state, and he starts seeing things such as dragons and serpents, and he ends up reflecting them in his stained glass image. And to me, I feel like that's kind of a hint of the skill. There's a few times throughout the book where it's pretty obvious that Wintrow is tapping into the skill ability, but they don't have like the name for it. And they believe it's part of the work of Sa, which is the god of this land. Another point is when Brashen had encountered a sea serpent, and he said basically Brashen was about to fling himself into the sea and basically end his life. And he realizes at some point that it wasn't his will, but it was a serpent influencing him. And it's like, okay, so these sea serpents have a skill ability. That's very intriguing. What could that mean? So that's only foreshadowing, but it's also kind of a hint of the skill. And even just the nature of the live ships themselves kind of showed the skill ability. The fact that Althea, while she is on the boat, is so connected to the ship, and she's able to feel what the ship is feeling even though she's not fully awakened yet. And the fact that people can put their emotions into the ship itself is very reminiscent of the skill ability. And then another point, again, kind of talking about how live ships kind of have that skill ability, is when Wintrow is starting to get connected to Vivacia. And he says then in the next instant he did something she did not understand. He left himself. He was not gone from his body, but in some strange way he was apart from it. It was almost as if he had joined her and looked through her eyes at the slender boy kneeling so still upon the foredeck. And so that's very reminiscent of a lot of what like Fitz does when he goes out of his body and he's able to see people fighting the red ships, that kind of a thing. And then the final skill reference that I noted in this book is when Wintrow is talking about the relationship between him and Vivacia, and he says, "It isn't you," he tried to explain. "It is that this feeling is so unnatural. It is like something imposed on me rather than something I truly feel, like a magic spell." And we know a lot of the skill is about influencing people in their actions. So again, I like the tie-in between all the books and this world. So that's all of my main discussion points for the non-spoiler section of this video. I do want to kind of get into some more spoiler things, not only for the rest of this book, but maybe a couple of things in the future books. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you can go ahead and stop watching this video, or you can just wait until this spoiler word goes away. So the thing that I want to talk about right now is my favorite thing about the Liveship Traders Trilogy, and the reason why I always tell people to read the Farseer Trilogy first before you read the Liveship Traders Trilogy, and it is for this reason alone. It is the character of Amber. Amber is introduced in this book as one of the character perspectives. She becomes a very important figure in the series, and she's the fool. That is why I always tell people to read the Farseer Trilogy first before getting to the Liveship Traders Trilogy, because when you figure out the fact that Amber is a fool, it is mind-blowing and super, super exciting. Like, I got so excited when I figured it out. I figured it out in book 2, but there's a lot of hints in this book that if you're paying attention, you're like, oh, that's the fool. And I made sure to tab them all. So, when we're first introduced to Amber is when Althea first spots her, and they're kind of drawn together. There's something very mysterious about Amber. So you guys know the fool always kind of had that air of mystery about him. And then again, when her and Brashen are passing the street that Amber's shop resides on, because Amber is a wood carver, which we all know, if you remember from Assassin's Quest, that was what the fool was doing. He was making toys out of wood. He was carving things out of wood. Just her general description of seeing Amber in the window was very reminiscent of the fool, such as, says her shop was neither shuttered nor barred, no guards lurked outside. Perhaps Amber trusted to her own strange presence to detect thieves. And then when Althea is kind of captured by the presence of Amber and how she looks, and she says, "She reminds me of my ship, lovely Vivacia, with all the colors of life over the silk grain of wizardwood." It says Amber's face abruptly changed to an expression of extreme distaste. Not quite sure of why the patrician disdain so alarmed him, Brashen nonetheless seized Althea by the elbow and firmly hurried her past the window and on down the dimly lit street. So we already kind of see that connection connection, that air of mystery around Amber. And then as we're introduced to her character more and more, there's a few things that we're kind of given hints of, such as when Althea sees her again and says she lifted her gaze to find Amber standing staring at her. The golden woman was dressed in a long simple robe, the color of ripe acorn, and her hair was bound down her back in a single shining plait. If we remember, the Fool was changing colors when Fitz last saw him, so he was becoming more like, you know, amber colored, not so pasty white as he used to be. And it says the fabric of the robe fell in pleats from her shoulders to the hem, concealing every line of her body. Her hands were gloved to conceal the scars and calluses of an artisan's fingers in the guise of a gentlewoman's hands. And of course, if you are paying attention, you'll remember that the Fool had to have his hands gloved because he has skill on his fingers, which maybe might be a reason why he's so good at carving. And then when Amber is again talking to Althea, it says, Amber nodded slowly more to herself than to the girl. So it seemed to me also, and yet it was not you at all that I went seeking. I went to the docks looking for a 9-figured slave boy, if you can credit that. She smiled oddly. You are what found me instead. There is a coincidence and there is fate, and I'm more than willing to argue with coincidence. But the few times I have argued with fate, I have lost badly. And so we know the fate that, you know, Amber's kind of talking about, if you can connect the dots between her being the Fool, is because of the fate, you know, her and Fitz were warring against. There's another scene where Amber is talking to Paragon, and she says, I have always been more curious than wise, yet any wisdom I have ever gained has come to me from my curiosity, so I've never learned to turn away from it. Again, this is a line that's very reminiscent of some of the things that the Fool would always tell Fitz. And then it says, there's another scene here where she says kind of the same thing, my curiosity has always been greater than my wisdom, but largest of all is my loneliness, because I'm a long way from home and family, and not just in distance, but in years. More Fool hints, because yes, I tabbed them all, where Amber is talking to the Paragon, and she says, I believe in fate, and I believe my fate has more terrible and heart-rending facets to it than even you can imagine. You, I know, are one of them. So for the sake of the child who rants and threatens from within the wooden bones of a ship, I will buy you and keep you safe, or as safe as fate will allow me. So there's all these hints that Amber is the Fool, and they're not as clear until you get to the mad ship. But when you get there and you realize Amber is a Fool, I got so excited, guys. I love the connection, and it's even more blatant in Ship of Destiny. There's a couple of people that they didn't realize it in Ship of Destiny, and I'm like, she literally carved Paragon's face to look like Fitz, like. And then it's even more clear in the later books when, you know, what the Fool did as Amber in the Rain Wilds ends up kind of going and following her back to the Six Duchies. So that was my favorite part. That's the reason why I love this trilogy, is the connection between the Farseer and the light ships, and it's all very exciting. The other spoilery thing that I want to talk about in this book is the serpents themselves. So we start to see hints of what the serpents actually were in this book, especially when they're talking about how they used to be lords of the lack and the plenty. The plenty, of course, would be the sea, the lack would be the air. And what does that mean? Dragons. There's a couple of references to the fact that the serpents are kind of remembering at a time in which they used to be dragons. And then we also hear Paragon kind of mimic the same type of thoughts and memories that the serpents have, which also kind of leads you to think, what could these serpents be? What could the live ships have come from? And then the live ship link is also confirmed in the Kupris family. We start to get their character perspectives, is when Johnny Kupris is talking to her son, and they talk about having to dump the bodies of dragons out of the wizard wood coffins, basically. And it's like, oh god, I can't believe you guys are responsible for almost killing all of the dragons. Alright guys, that is it for my discussion video on the Liveship Traders Trilogy. I hope you guys seen all of my thoughts and feelings on the book. If you read it, please let me know what you guys think of the book, because we can talk about it in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!